Hello, my 5th and 6th grade friends. Today we are going to read Chapter 4 of Inkling. Don't forget to answer the question at the end. Chapter 4. In his bedroom, Ethan dumped his backpack and dropped heavily into his chair. He flipped open the laptop. He had a ton of work to do, and he knew he also needed to check under his bed for tarantulas, or worse. But he couldn't face any of it yet. He could just play a game or two of maybe Realm of Evil. Maybe he'd feel better. His screen lit up and he logged on and started fighting orcs. His dad could be such a jerk, accusing him of stealing his stupid sketches. Why didn't he just do another Kren book? Everyone wanted one, and at least he'd be doing something useful instead of grumping at everyone all the time. From the corner of his eye, he could just see his graphic novel project on the floor, but he refused to turn and face it. Head on. It was too depressing. He cut off more orcs' heads, but there was something about the project that kept nagging at his eye, so he turned and looked, and kept looking, because even though the project was exactly where he had left it, it couldn't have been more different. Ethan jumped up from his chair and crouched in front of it. Panel after panel, the entire first page was drawn in ink. Every scene he'd sketched with stick figures was finished, and it was good. The zoo, the animals, the secret passage, and the gorilla. The gorilla was just the way he'd imagined it, completed and unable to draw. Ethan hunched over it and felt a flood of relief and also happiness, not just because the work was good, but because he thought his father had done it for him. Dad must have come into his room while he was at school and felt sorry for him and done the first page just to help him out and show him the way. Something edged out from under his bed. Ethan didn't holler this time, but he dropped the illustration board and scuttled back on his bum. The inky blotch seeped out onto the blank half of the board and stopped. If anything, it was bigger than it had been this morning, but it definitely wasn't a bug. There were no squiggly legs or antennas, and it was completely flat. He would have said it was ink, except that it left no stain behind. The ink didn't move on its own. Ethan patted behind him for his hockey stick. Whatever this thing was, he was gonna hammer it to smithereens. He kept his eyes on it, and he had the strangest feeling it was keeping its eyes on him, too, which was impossible, since it had no eyes. Still, it was giving an excellent expression of being watched, and somehow expectant. "What are you?" Ethan murmured to himself. The splotch started to move, and Ethan's hand found the hockey stick and gripped it tight. Staying on the board, the ink splotch swirled itself into a perfect question mark. Ethan stared. "What does that mean? Are you asking me a question or are you answering one?" The question mark pulsed faintly on the board. "You don't know what you are," Ethan said. "Is that what you mean?" Ethan gasped as the ink swirled and started to speed into a big smiley face. "Okay," said Ethan. "You're smiling at me now. Does that mean yes? You don't know what you are?" The ink morphed itself into a thumbs up sign. Ethan couldn't help grinning. Whatever this thing was, it seemed quite cheerful. It didn't seem like it wanted to eat him or anything. His grip on the hockey stick loosened but didn't release. "If you don't know what you are, do you know where you come from?" He jerked back with a start as the ink exploded all across the black half of the illustration board, and then, with amazing speed, all the splatter marks formed themselves into a little sketch, plants and people and buildings. "Hey," Ethan said, frowning, "that looks like Dad's stuff." One of the drawings turned into a bouncing thumbs-up sign. "Okay, so Dad made some of the drawings." And suddenly the drawings all flowed together into a big splotch, and the splotch rolled and gave a mighty jerk, as if to be pulling itself right off the paper. Ethan shook his head, wondering what on earth it was doing. And after a second pull, the inky blotch sprang off the illustration board like a slinky toy and landed on the floor, a little closer to Ethan. He shuffled back, watching intently, and the ink quivered for a second and then formed itself into a cat with sharp claws. "Hey, that's Rickman," Ethan asked. The cat picture dissolved back into a blob and scurried frantically across the floor. Ethan stood up, gripping the hockey stick, worried that things had gone crazy. What if it jumped onto him next? But it was darting fearfully this way and that, like it was trying to escape something. "I don't understand," said Ethan. The ink stopped and crept stealthily back toward the illustration board. It slid onto it and then very intentionally pushed a black tendril over one of the beautiful drawings, erasing it completely. "Hey," said Ethan, "be careful." The ink pulled back, and with a delicate paintbrush sharded tendril, redrew the work it had erased exactly. Ethan exhaled. Whew! His own thoughts felt like tiny balls of black ink ricocheting around his head. The ink splotch moved to the blank half of the illustration board and waited expectantly. "You're telling me a story," Ethan said. He got a thumbs up for that one. "So, the pictures in my dad's sketchbook all kind of ran together, and you're the ink?" He got a happy face. "And then you jumped off the sketchboard." That would explain the blank pages Dad had complained about. No one had taken the pages. The ink had literally run away. "But it was hard work," Ethan continued with a quiver, "to get off. And when you got chased, was that Rickman?" The ink informed it into a question mark again. "Rickman. Our cat, our cat." He got a happy face, which quickly turned into a sad face. Ethan couldn't help smiling. The idea of Rickman as a terrifying animal was pretty funny. Rickman could hardly hop off the sofa. Ethan moved a little closer to the illustration board. "So you ran away from Rickman and ended up in my room." A smiley face bobbed up and down. "And you got onto my drawings and—" He remembered his math textbook. "Hey, you erase whatever you touch. That was you. I got in trouble." The smiley face drooped. "It's okay," said Ethan. "And you did all this?" He pointed at the drawing of his graphic novel. The sad face lifted into a happy one and nodded. "You drew all this today? It's amazing." Ethan sat back with a sigh, trying to make sense of it all. The ink of his father's sketches had somehow come to life, and this ink had the power to erase and draw, and the pictures it could do. He gazed at the finished art again. But how did you know the story? He hadn't noticed the crumpled page of Soren's script until now, probably because it was completely blank, except for a few stray letters on the edges. "You read his story?" Ethan breathed. What other explanation could there be? It was the only thing to draw a gorilla, but these pictures were clearly based on his stick figures and the scenes in the story. "You can read." As Ethan watched in amazement, a tiny point of ink sketched out a very shakily wrote, "A bit." For a moment Ethan couldn't say anything, and then he asked, "How?" The first words slurped back into the ink and were replaced by books. "This is incredible," Ethan said. This creature had taught himself to read and write all in the space of a day. He shuffled closer to the paper. He was still a little nervous being near the ink. It could move so quickly. But he was pretty sure it wasn't dangerous. And it was certainly smart. "Do you have a name?" "No." Ethan thought for a moment. Everything needed a name. "What did you call a thing made of ink?" An ink thing. An inching. An inkling. "Inkling," he said. "Do you like that name?" The ink was still for a moment, as if it was considering, and then a tiny tip reached out and wrote, "Yes." And then Inkling wrote his name on the board, not just once, but several times in different types of letters, plain letters, fancy letters, faster and faster, and when Inkling was done writing his name, the ink flowed back together and formed a happy face. Ethan smiled too. "So you can see me?" "Yes." He wondered how it was possible since Inkling did not seem to have any eyes. But then again, Inkling didn't seem to have any ears either, and he could hear. Inkling started to draw. In awe, Ethan watched as the lines appeared on the paper, something fine, sometimes thick, head, face, eyes, nose, mouth, hair, shading, texture. Inkling never once erased a line or made a smear. And in under a minute, Inkling had drawn an amazing picture of him, except Ethan tilted his head. In the picture, he was younger by several years, and with a start, he recognized himself from the laser-printed photograph of him and his mom. He stood and looked at his bulletin board. The picture was just a white rectangle. "Hey," he said, turning back to Inkling, "what did you do?" It was hard to talk because of the lump in his throat. Inkling formed himself into a question mark. "That photograph of me and my mom," he said, fighting to keep his voice low, even though he was suddenly very angry. "You erased it." "Erased?" "Yeah, you moved across it, now it's gone." "I need ink." "Well, put her back. You need to bring her back." Inkling slid off the paper and across the floor. He flowed up to the top of the chest of drawers and onto the bulletin board. At the edge of the blank photograph, Inkling paused and then began to draw. Even though Inkling himself was all blackness, he seemed to contain every color. Line by line, Ethan's mother reappeared like some miracle. Ethan's eyes prickled. Her image was just as vivid as before, if anything more vivid, because the original photo had faded in the sunlight, and this one looked like it had been taken yesterday. Thanks, said Ethan, clearing his throat. There's some things you shouldn't erase, okay? Silently on the wooden surface of his chest of drawers, Inkling wrote, "Where is Mom?" Ethan hadn't needed to answer that question in a while, and he was startled by how much it hurt just to think the words. She died. Died? Gone. Forever. Inkling was still, as if he couldn't think of anything to say. Ethan went and sat down on the edge of his bed, staring at the artwork. Inkling slid onto the illustration board and pointed at the drawings. Good? Yeah, I couldn't draw like that in 100 years. Inkling immediately started drawing the next panel. Ethan watched, hypnotized. It was a lot like his father's style, but not quite. He chewed on the inside of his mouth. Stop, he said. Inkling stopped. No good? No, it's fantastic. It's just, how could he do any of the art himself now? Whatever he did next would be so bad it would be obvious someone else had done the first part. He had to scrap the whole thing and start over. But how he could get rid of Inkling's art, it was so good. And he owed it to the group to give them decent art, didn't he? They asked him, and he had said yes, and they were counting on him. Soren had already worked hard on the story, and Pino would be the perfectionist with the color, and Brady, well, Brady might mess up the lettering, but still, it wasn't fair if they all got a bad grade because of his terrible drawings. Why not let Inkling finish the art? It wasn't like Ethan would be doing nothing. He would sketch the panels with his stick figures, and then all Inkling would have to do was turn them into drawings. Maybe just a little more for now, Ethan told the Inkling. All right, my 5th and 6th grade friends, that is the first half of Chapter 4. Here's your question. Ethan is going to get the Inkling to do his work for him and draw his sketches. What do you think about that? Is that fair, or is he kind of cheating? Leave me a message. Miss you guys.